Welcome to the Southeast Collaborative Online Conference. And as an acknowledgement, this project is made possible in part by a Library Services and Technology Act grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Services. Thank you, IMLS. And now we'll hand it over to our presenter, Curtis Rogers.
All right, thank you so much. Really appreciate you having me with you, and hope we have a lot of great speakers at the conference, and it's nice to be able to do this virtually from home, even though my home does not look like this in the background. But anyway, welcome to Library Signage, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I am Dr. Curtis Rogers, formerly of the South Carolina State Library, and I ended up retiring last summer and have started my own consulting business, and it's a pleasure to be with you today. So I'm going to go ahead and advance my slide. So as we're doing this welcome and introductions, one of the things that you can do as an attendee is introduce yourself in the chat. So please feel free to do that by putting your library, and also maybe put your job title, say what you do at your library, so that way you can do some virtual networking with all the other attendees, and folks can see over there in the chat what it is you do and what library you're representing. So today's session outline, and we're going to go for about 50 minutes or so, and then we'll have time for Q&A. We'll talk a lot about my library signage philosophy, and I was the communications director for a number of years at the South Carolina State Library and really got into signage and library signage. And I'll talk some about how it started. We'll do some library signage 101, just kind of cover the basics of what you should know. Also, we'll do something called a plus delta with some real library signs. Part of my journey in library signage is I conducted over 70 library signage audits, and both at academic and public libraries. So I have a ton of signs that I can show you that we'll review. Also, we'll talk some about customer service issues. And I have a long list of equipment and resources that I think folks will be interested to see. And I'll also show you a COVID-19 communications resource. Also, if any of you are on WebJunction, I had conducted a webinar on effective library signage and crisis communications. So that's something you can look for in WebJunction if you're joined there. But I'm going to go ahead and dive right in, and let's think critically about this sign on the next slide. I think a lot of you, and by the way, I've tried to hide a lot of library logos and phone numbers and such. This is a very typical sign, mostly in academic libraries, but it's something you usually see around photocopiers. And one of the things that I like for folks to think critically about when you put up this kind of sign, or you maybe have some kind of requirement about the sign, is why really do you have this sign? Is anyone actually standing there and reading it? It is 3 paragraphs long. It has to do with, Title 17 of the United States Codes, Patent Law, Title 35, United States Code, and people are standing there making photocopies. They are, even though, this is important information, they're not reading it. So is there a real need for this kind of sign? One of the things I do love about this sign is it's in an acrylic holder that has suction cups, that's on glass. That's one of the few positives I see about this sign. But otherwise, what I want to do by showing you these images of library signs is taking them out of context. So it's important to, and we'll talk about this in the signage audit section, it's important to take photos of signs around your library and then view them in a different context. Do they still make sense? And it's a little technique that you can use to help you figure out what you're doing. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on. So my library signage philosophy, I've already mentioned this, but you'll hear this phrase a lot. I want you to think critically about your library's signage and what it means. So it's important to really, think about why you have a sign placed where it is, what it says, the fonts, the colors, every nuance about it. And I also want you to think, as we're thinking critically about library signs, is that less is more. What you need to do when you are creating a sign, even if it's a temporary sign, think about getting it down to as few words as possible, because most people do not stand there and read an entire sign. Also, one thing that I think is really good to do is to compare your signage to signs you see when you're out shopping or at the doctor's office, or if you're at the bank or any other kind of retail location. How does your library signage compare with other commercial signage? Do you have your library's logo on most of your signs? Do you have the same color scheme on most of your signs? Do your signs look homemade? Do you have any handwritten signs? So think of that. Also, I'm going to be showing you real library signs, and yes, these I have seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. And in fact, here are some signs that we may have seen in some public libraries. And also, as I'm going through these signs, please feel free to comment in chat. I know a lot of these signs bring a lot of things to mind, especially for those of you who tend to view yourself as grammarians. So these two signs represent a really odd thing for me, because I always look at apostrophes and think of possessives. And so when I see, signs like this, I'm like, well, what about the music CDs? What is the possessive of the CDs or the DVDs? So, remember when you have signs like this around your library that the apostrophe S is incorrect. You would want to have maybe a capital CD and a lowercase s, or a capital DVD and a lowercase s. You also have to think of font. Can most people read a certain font? Is the color of the font okay? Also, is the clip art appropriate? Is it consistent? So things of that nature. All right, I'm going to go ahead and move on and talk a little bit about how this started. And for those of you who have never heard of it, there is a Library Marketing and Communications Conference. It's something I highly recommend folks to Google. In fact, if anyone wants to find the Library Marketing and Communications Conference URL and go ahead and cut and paste that into the chat, that would be helpful. That way folks can go to the website and learn more about what's going on with LMCC. I am still actually on the governing board of LMCC. It's a great conference. We have been virtual, but in November 2022, the conference will be in person in Indianapolis. So be sure and keep an eye out for that. But anyway, I had, and I think this was in 2016, I had attended a session at LMCC conference when it was in Philadelphia, or right outside of Philadelphia, called "Do You See the Signs? Evaluating Language, Branding, and Design in a Library Signage Audit." And it was by Amy Stempler and Mark Aaron Polgar. And they really caught my attention. To this day, I still vividly remember paying attention to every single nuance in their presentation, and it was absolutely fascinating. And it really made me think what I needed to do right when I got back to my library, to look at the library signs and, were they confusing? Were people getting the most out of them, etc. Okay, so I have a few slides here about the positives and negatives and some tips about library signage. I just call this Library Signage 101. So the positive items: be sure and use polite language. Try not to be verbose, really do get to the point. Also, one of the important things is that, and I'm not saying this has to be on every single sign, because it just depends based on what the sign is for. But try your best to use your library logo and branding consistently. That way people will get used to seeing your library logo. For instance, pretty much I think anyone knows what the colors are and what the look is for Target and Walmart signs. And if you're in one of those stores, maybe taking a look and understanding how that branding is consistent and how you think about it all the time when you're there or even when you're not there. And that's something that maybe you can do for your community by using a very consistent library logo and brand. Also, try not to have any typos in your sign. That's something that is important. I, however, am guilty of that in the past. I know I have seen signs that I have done and may have had typos, and you just have to redo it. Also, you want to use correct grammar, like the apostrophe S's. Font and font size, you have to think of accessibility. Also, if it's a permanent sign, does it need Braille? And also an image that supports the content. And one of the things I try to say is to not use clip art, but maybe use some kind of image. And now, granted, if you are using clip art, something like the Wi-Fi sign or the Wi-Fi symbol, that's appropriate for a sign that maybe you have to post the username and password for Wi-Fi. So just have to think critically about each sign you put up. Also, the tip I have here is use Grammarly.com. If you've never heard of Grammarly, it's a wonderful, wonderful resource that helps you double check your grammar, punctuation, spelling. It may not be that useful for signs, but at least you can, check spelling and make sure everything is going well. Okay, and then we have the negative. So one of the big negatives of a sign in the library is if it's handwritten. And I just want you to take a second in the chat. What comes to mind when you see a sign that is handwritten? And just kind of think that through, because say you're going up to a business and you see a handwritten sign on the door, or you are in the library and you see a handwritten sign at a service area. What does that make you think? And a lot of times it can think that someone doesn't have enough time to make a real sign. It also, some of you may be saying that it looks unprofessional, and yes, it does. So you have to think of how the sign that you create actually comes off to other people. Also, you don't want to have too many words. Again, with clip art, try not to use it unless, and I have unless here, unless it is important to what it is you're trying to convey. Also, try not to use different fonts such as Comic Sans and Papyrus, things that are maybe too difficult for someone to see. Try to be as basic as possible. Also, you don't want to be passive aggressive in your library signs. You don't want to say a lot of know this, know that, and then, oh, thank you. So just get to the point and try not to have too many colors and try not to have too much going on. Again, this can be another thing you have to think critically about, is you might have to have a lot going on in a sign to convey what it is you're trying to do. And here's another tip, is after you create a sign, go back and start deleting useless words or redundant words. Try to get it down to as few words as possible. The best library door sign I've ever seen was no sign at all, because the door was clearly in an area that was going back to staff only access, and it had a numeric keypad at the door handle. So that door didn't even need a sign. So I remember taking a picture of it and saying, this is a good example of when you don't even need a sign, because you can't get in there unless you have the key code. All right. So I want to talk a little bit more about this. Years ago, I've been doing a signage audit at a library, and you can see in the background, this is a stairwell, so it goes up to the second floor. And I actually stood off to the side and pretended I was playing with my smartphone. And I wanted to see how many people in about 10 minutes who were going up the stairs to the second level were stopping and looking at any of these signs. And you'll notice a lot of these signs have a lot of verbiage on them. In that 10 minutes, there were maybe 5, 6, 7 people who went by, and no one stopped to look at any of these signs. So it's something that you need to think about. When does this become overkill? When is there clutter? How does this look professional? You know, a lot of times I know it's easy to just put up another sign, but again, thinking critically about why you need that sign in the first place, and is anyone actually looking at it? So just remember that tip: less is more. Okay, this is an actual sign I saw in a men's room at a public library. So yes, it's very cringeworthy, I know. In fact, it's so old you can see where the tape has faded, and the color has faded. So one of the things to think about is, you know, if someone can write on a sign, they will. And if they think they're not being seen in a restroom, then they will try to write on the sign. So this is the case where you would use acrylic holders. I do like, however, on this sign, how they did a nice little, you know, corner border. But anyway, something like this kind of a sign, this is completely inappropriate in a library. It's not something that you should have in the bathroom or anywhere for that matter. However, I want you to think, what kind of sign would you have in a restroom? Because in a restroom and an elevator, those are two areas where you have captive audiences. So if you think about being able to post signs of upcoming events, maybe have them on a weekly rotation or a monthly rotation, check on them, make sure people are not writing on them. And I know a lot of people don't like to talk about restroom signage, but it's something that is useful. So I want you to think critically about maybe how you could use acrylic holders, put event signs in the library, in the library's restrooms. That's something to consider. Okay, let me go ahead and move to the next slide. These two images on the right, they are actually signs that I saw in an academic and a public library. The top one was at an academic library. The bottom one was at a small public library branch. And it made me think, you know, does my library have a recommended set of fonts? Does my library have a recommended color scheme? Is this information in some kind of communications manual? So, you know, it's really important and useful to think of all these things to give consistency to every single sign in your library. I have an example over here on the left. If you're able to add a Media Kit web page, and we're going to look at one in a second, to your library's website, maybe in the About Us section, you'll be able to add logos, colors, fonts. All of this information can be used for printing. Staff would have access to it. Anyone who is promoting the library, if you're working with another partner, you would be able to direct them to that page. They would have all your logos, everything, so that they could help promote whatever event it is you're partnering on. But most importantly, you know, make sure you're using a consistent font, and make sure that all of the words in your sign are correctly spelled. So, you know, if you think of the sign on the bottom where it says restricted workers only behind the counter, you know, having something that says staff only, cutting it down to as few words as possible, and making sure those words are spelled correctly is really important. Also, what you have to think about your signage is, does it include crisis communications? Is that something that you have considered in relationship to signage? How are you getting the word out? How are you telling your patrons, customers, potential patrons, what it is you're doing? So think about that as well. Having a signage policy is also very important. And this can be just an internal document that tells your entire staff what the policy is of the library regarding signage. And you can just Google library signage policy, and you'll get lots of examples. Okay, next slide. So here's an example of what I was talking about. This is the Library of Michigan, State Library of Michigan at michigan.gov. You can see this is the LM Media Kit page. This is a very plain page, but it has a ton of information that's really good for partners and for printers, anyone accessing this who needs, to get the logo in different formats, shows the colors, all of that kind of stuff. So this is important, and it's a good idea to think about working with your web developer or whoever manages your website to see if you can't get a page that is kind of like a media kit in your About Us section so that someone can easily find all this information. Also, you want to make sure your signage templates are accessible offsite. If you don't have a signage template, it's a good idea to create a signage template, either have, on an intranet or maybe a shared document sharing service somewhere like Google Drive or a Dropbox. And that way, if there is an emergency or some kind of crisis and your library is shut down, you can still print out a sign from home on a template that you could go to your library and actually affix to your entrance or exits so that people would be aware of what's going on if anyone just shows up to the library. Okay, so let me go on to the next screen, and I want to talk a little bit about the sign barrier. And I think as I'm saying sign barrier, a lot of you are probably visualizing exactly what I'm talking about because I've been in a number of libraries and I have seen this sign barrier, and I also can tell you how it makes me feel. And I think if you go into a library and see this, you can tell how it would make you feel. So you can see up in the far right corner, there's a person sitting at the desk, and this is the desk. And I call this a sign barrier. And this one happens to be a pamphlet barrier. But again, think critically. How does this make the customer feel? How does this make your library patron feel? This is a physical barrier between your staff and your customers. And is it off-putting? Is it something that makes you feel you're distracted? So it can cause a lot of issues, and it can also be information overload. My philosophy of stuff like this is that, keep this behind the desk, even if you need all of it. Is it in the right location? Is this where people are going to take this information from? But also remember how it makes people feel. It creates that physical barrier. Also now with COVID and people coming into the library, a lot of you, I'm sure, have physical acrylic barriers. How, are you affixing information to those? Is it overkill? Is it something that is very distracting? So you have to think about that as well. Here's another example. This was, around the corner of an information desk. And again, it's just information overload. Is all of this, who's checking regularly to see if this has been updated? When do these items need to be discarded or updated? So you have to think critically about that too. Okay, now I'd like to do something called the plus delta. And you can be ready in the chat section to discuss these signs as we go through them. And please feel free to have as many comments as you'd like. And we'll just talk about these signs. What I'm going to do is describe some of these library signs that I've taken photos of, and post in the chat about, what you think works. That's the positive, the plus. And then what could be changed? It's very difficult for us to sometimes think about the positives of these kind of things, since our brain tends to react a little bit more critically at first. But if you try to think about what's working well with something and then what could possibly be changed with something, you tend to get a little bit better outcome. And also the person who has created the sign tends to feel a lot less attacked. So anyway, you can see over here on the left, I can look at this and see what works well. I can see that the yellow color with the red lettering tends to work well. But unfortunately, that's about it in this situation. You can see that this is a sign that's taped over two other signs, one of which is kind of curled on one end. Also, it's unnecessary use of quotation marks. So yes, we're open, but what does open mean? So, we have to think about how we would change something like that. There's a lot of text on the bottom, and it's also difficult to see. So possibly changing the color of that font with the yellow background, all of those kind of things that I want to think critically as we go through these other signs. So we'll go ahead on to the first one. These are 4 signs that were in the parking lot area of a public library. You can see it says these premises are under the jurisdiction of this city and county law enforcement. We have no loitering in all caps. Then with upper and lower on the bottom 2, we have no food allowed and no hoodies allowed. So one of the things that jumps out to me as a positive, and you can, of course, in chat, go ahead and be saying what you think is a positive and what you think should maybe be changed, is that I think they're bright, they're effective, they're eye-catching. You can see the font color against the background. That's important. However, when I get to the bottom sign, no hoodies allowed, I think of equity and diversity and inclusion. And I have to admit that when I look at something like this, I think there's a racial bias or some kind of age bias that is being held that, it doesn't come off that well. Just because someone is wearing a hoodie, what does that mean? So again, thinking critically about how these kind of signs would make someone feel. I can understand the no loitering and no food allowed, but the no hoodies has a concern there, and it has kind of an edge. Is that somewhere I even want to go inside? Okay, next one here we've got, this is clearly a COVID-19 sign. There's a lot of information going on. I did delete the library logo that was in the lower left-hand corner just to not show that. But a lot of these templates are being used in libraries across the country that you can get from the CDC, so that you can post them in your library. And one of the positives I think about this is the font is pretty good, and I do like the colors. I think the colors are attractive, but it's a lot of information. And how is this information being taken in? Is it too much information? Do we need to break this kind of sign apart and just have it into its own discrete areas? Also, is there too much verbiage as far as how could we say differently, stay 6 feet apart from others? Could we just have the image with the words 6 feet? I mean, it's kind of understood that's what you're getting at. Sanitize your hands after sneezing or coughing. Could maybe we say sanitize hands and just cut it down that way, and do that with all of the other areas. So again, thinking critically about each aspect of the sign, where it's posted. Is it posted in the restroom? Is it posted in areas where people can see it? This is another area that you want to think about. If you're not front staff, how do you know exactly where a lot of people are going to notice it? So when you're creating and posting signs, always consult with front desk staff, public services staff, and see where the high traffic areas are and get them to help you figure out what's the best location to post a sign. Okay, next one. This is a men's room sign. You can see it has some book spines, and you can tell it's also one of those more permanent signs. It has Braille on it. And again, this is one of those very typical library supplier signs. So if a library is being renovated or built, this is a lot of times what kind of sign you would be able to select. But one of the comments I've had on this in the past is that why is the handicapped person so much smaller than the person who is standing up? And who would think about that? Maybe someone who is in a wheelchair would think about that. So again, thinking critically about each sign. Next one. Please read, stop sign, do not enter, stop here, employees only, 5 exclamation points, underlined and red. Only disabled users are allowed to use the bathroom beyond this point. I found this to be a very confusing sign. Also, you can see where it's a little ripped on the edge. What are some ways we could maybe do this sign differently? Maybe we could, obviously they're having a problem with people just going in and using that area for the restroom. But think of what's a different way that we could do this. Could we say staff only, and then just have under that handicap bathroom entrance, as few words as possible, or ask for assistance at the front. Maybe change it to that. But otherwise, this is kind of a little bit of an alarming sign, and something you have to think critically. How is it someone feels? How do they feel when they see this sign? Here's another set of signs. These I actually really liked. Some people may not because of the image, but you can see it's a new books area. These are ceiling hanging signs. And we've also got the Spanish language on the other side. So again, think about, and this is great. I think new books, and it's as few words as possible. So think about, examples of what works and maybe what to change. And then lastly, I want to, memes are cute and they're great, and I like them for social media, and I like to be able to forward them to friends on social media. But printing them out and putting them at a service desk area, I think kind of goes, in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, it just looks really unprofessional. It's cute, but what's the real need for something like this? Again, thinking through why you would post a sign like that. Okay, so I want to change gears just a moment and talk about the library signage audit. You can do a library signage audit yourself. And in fact, I'm going to show you one of the last slides I have is a reference to Mark Aaron Polger's book that's available on the ALA store. Library Signage and Wayfinding Design. Chapter 3 of the book talks all about conducting a signage audit. And it's very, very helpful. So definitely check out, see if you can find a copy of that book. But anyway, what you can do, and what I had done in the past when I was doing signage audits at physical locations before COVID, you just go around and take pictures of every kind of sign that you see at your library. And what you do with those images is that you create a visual report, because what it is you're trying to do is take each sign out of context and see whether or not it makes sense. And what you'll also think about is what is working well, and then what you should consider changing. Okay, I think I had muted myself there for a second. Um, anyway, so what you can do is you can also look at the library's exterior. You're going to want to walk around the entire facility. You're going to think about the overall observation. You're going to look at parking signs, smoking areas. Is there any seating that's outside? Also, importantly, can the hours be seen from the road? Um, do you also have any kind of vegetation that's growing up over the sign so that you can't see the sign? So think through all of those things and take a good hour or two to take pictures of every single sign you see and figure out whether or not it works. Okay, and then there are a lot of different things you can consider. One of the really important things is to think about reviewing your library in a Google search and see what other people have said about your library. Are there actual reviews when you just search for your library's name in Google? Also, are the hours and locations showing up correctly? Because if someone maybe is doing genealogical research and they're in town, they don't know your small town or area, they're going to just Google the name of the public library they're going to type in, is there a library near me? So do all of that in Google and see what comes up. And that way you can figure out whether or not someone's going to be able to find you. And also, how welcoming is the library? Do you have a lot of images of the library in Google? Do you have interior images in Google? Also, you should think about, are there any unofficial social media pages or groups that fits into the library image? Is there something out there that is, maybe taking an issue with the library? So look for those kind of things as well. And those kind of things are outside the signage audit, but they kind of fit in with the image of the library and what people are thinking about the library. Okay, so changing gears again, I want to talk a little bit about customer service issues and signage. One of the things I always used to think when someone at the library would ask me to create a sign is there an absolute need for this sign, or are we trying to do something that is really needs to have a systemic change? So is a sign really going to help with this issue? And how should we react to that? So you want to think, is this sign going to work? And why or why not? And is there customer service training needed? Is there some kind of other issue that we have to think about? For instance, this sign on the left was a sign that I saw at a bank of computers in a public library. And it actually says, if you are unsure about using the computer, please bring someone that will be able to help you. In other words, we're not going to help you with this computer. And how does that make someone feel? Maybe not everybody has someone they can bring with them to help them with the computer. And what is the mission of the library? What is the issue here? That it made me think that there was some problem going on. So I'm going to show you two signs. I'm going to read them real quickly. I found these in a small rural library branch men's room. And this just goes to show you the kind of issues that some libraries are dealing with. To the person, because you are not a man, who continues to defecate on the floor on a regular basis, please be advised that this situation is to stop immediately. If you continue with this behavior, I will station someone at the bathroom door who will enter the restroom with each and every person. Branch librarian. So a lot of anger there. This is an issue and not maybe dealing with it the best possible way. Then leaving the bathroom, there was another sign that said, please be advised that alcoholic beverages are not allowed on counter property. Leaving empty beer cans in the men's restroom is being monitored. No tolerance. You can see this is a really agitated branch librarian, and I don't blame them. But what is another way that you could deal with this kind of situation with signage and a procedural change? Because obviously there is something going on that, monitoring the restrooms does need to occur. And one of the things that you can do is, if you're able to, lock the restroom and put a sign that says restrooms are for customers only. Ask attendant for a key, or ask for a key at the circulation desk. So that way, people who are using the restroom, they're less likely to do anything, really bad, because they know it's being monitored. So as we're kind of winding down, I want to talk for maybe about 10 more minutes or so and kind of review some different signage equipment and things that I think are important for libraries to have, but also and what I'm going to show does have a lot of prices. So I want you to think about budget considerations for those of you who are library managers, library administrators. I want you to think about the kinds of things that you need to consider about having a PR budget line, a signage equipment budget line, something so that you can plan for each year the kinds of things that you need to consider with your interior and exterior signage. So things like a laminator, different acrylic holders, and having backups for acrylic holders because they can break. Floor signs, street level signs, banner stands. There are all different kinds of things that you can consider. Neon signs are becoming more and more popular. Something that can be seen from the street with the hours of operation is really important. Especially if you're in an area that might have a lot of out-of-town guests. Also consider digital. They're not as expensive as you think, but you have to think critically about them being strategically placed. Do you have a captive audience to actually stand there or sit there and see a screen, digital screen scrolling the same information over and over? And you also have to think about how often is it updated. Also, having iPads or tablets as an interactive display, you have to consider people touching it and how often it is cleaned. Okay, so all of these are for informational purposes only. I will say that I am not specifically recommending any one kind of brand or item. I just want you to get a sense and ideas of how much things tend to cost. And generally, they're not as expensive as you think. Some are expensive, but you just have to actually look. So here is a thermal laminator. Laminating a sign makes it look very professional. So it's something that you can think about. You can see this one's only $22, but you do have to also think about the lamination material that is going through it, and if it's thermal or if it's sticky, adhesive, and how that operates, and then getting refills and purchasing refills for those. Also, there are tons of different kinds of acrylic and wood holders. What works well in your situation? You can see you can get a 2-pocket trifold pamphlet holder that's clear acrylic with black sides that looks very attractive, and that's only $11. And then you can go all the way up into the $60 if you've got wood and acrylic. So you have to think of what's going to work best in your situation. Okay, and then you have 11 by 17 menu floor stands. These are great, and it's best if you get one that you can switch from profile to landscape. But also you have to think, are you able to print 11 by 17 in-house? Or is this something that you can use a printer for? These are wonderful because they move around a lot. They're not terribly expensive. You can see they are about $150 if you get a good solid one. And a lot of times they're easy to just load and unload the piece of paper in there. So it's good to move around for programs if you have, if you need signage to direct people in a certain direction through the library. Okay, and then what I want to say about these outdoor board signs, kind of like these lunch board signs, they're great. But the thing you have to think about with them is, are you in a location where they could walk away? You don't want to leave them out overnight because they could walk away, but it needs to be somebody's job in the library to put it out in the morning and bring it back inside at the end of the day. Also, do you need them with wheels? Is it going to be difficult to maneuver? I have seen a number of libraries have these in their foyer or inside, and that's not their purpose. They're called a sidewalk sign because they're meant to be out on the sidewalk. So if you have any of these, be sure they go outside so that you can use them outside. Okay, and then banner stands. These run the gamut all the way, you can see here, from 129 up to 367. And you get what you pay for when it comes to these. You want to think about, is this something that's going to be used a lot, or is it just going to stay open and maybe you move it around to different places? You can also get double-sided banner stands. So think about what your need is. If you're doing a lot of exhibiting or maybe partner work with other groups and you want to have a presence, make sure whatever you put on one of these signs is that it's not time sensitive. You want to be as generic as possible. Maybe just have the library name, logo, maybe an image, and the URL. But don't put a phone number, fax number, email address, anything like that that may change in a year or two, because you want to be able to use these as often as you can. Okay, and then you've got the acrylic hanging poster frame, 11 by 17. So again, if you can print 11 by 17, these are very good to use. And then my absolute favorite is the 8.5 by 11 acrylic window sign holder with suction cup. You can see you get these for around $10 each. These are great because you can move them around easily. You don't have to worry about scraping the tape off of a glass area after you have posted a sign with tape. You just are able to move it where you need it. And it's a really good idea to have, if you can afford them, to have a number of these in all of your library branches so that they can be used and moved around, and they look professional. Again, something that people can't write on, and they come in handy. And here is the open and closed LED sign with business hours. You can see a lot of people think these are really expensive, but if you budget for this, and let's say you bought in bulk because you needed 5 for 5 branches, then they're going to be about $125 each. Programmable, so it's easy. You can put the hours for every day, and if someone is at a street level and they don't want to get out of their car, they can see whether or not it's open or closed very easily. Also, you can get LED signs that just say open or closed. So think about that too. And then digital signage, I said I would mention this. You can see here's a digital sign that is not too terribly large, but it's about $220. You do have to think about, again, whether or not you have a captive audience, if someone is going to be able to stand or sit in a certain location and see the information that's rotating through it. Also, it has to be part of someone's job to update this on a regular basis. Okay, I know I wanted to mention a really good COVID communications site, and this is at the South Carolina State Library, and it is a LibGuide or a LibGuide, however you say it. And this is part of the Coronavirus and Public Libraries Resources. This is a communications guide, which is very helpful. And if you go to this, you'll be able to scroll down and see all of the useful information that is there, and get more ideas about what you should think about with not only COVID, but also any kinds of crisis communications and marketing that you need to deal with. And then I have a few pages that are some really good resources for you to take a look at. If you don't have these books in your library, what you can do is ILL them. Try to find them somewhere or purchase them for your library. But Kathy Dempsey has a great book, The Accidental Library Marketer, and also Matthews, The Customer Focused Library, Reinventing the Public Library from the Outside In. Those are both highly recommended. Also, what you can do is you can just Google bad library signs, and just put that in quotes, and you'll find tons and tons of examples of bad library signs. There are even some memes out there you can find. And lastly, we have 3 other titles that I think are very useful. The Library Crisis Communications Planner. This is a PR guide for handling every emergency. And then Library Marketing and Communications Strategies to Increase Relevance and Results. And then lastly, I mentioned this earlier about doing the signage audit. This is Mark Aaron Polger's Library Signage and Wayfinding Design, Communicating Effectively with Your Users. So these are all resources I recommend you check them out. And again, if you're doing the signage audit, you can find that in chapter 3 of that last title there on library signage and wayfinding design. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. I would like to thank you for attending this session. And my name, again, Dr. Curtis Rogers, curtisrogersconsulting.com, and there's my email address. So you can certainly contact me, and I'll be happy to try to answer any of your questions. So I think we've gone, Tiffany, for about 50 minutes, and I think we'll go ahead and open it up for questions.